Hello vinyl freaks, it's the Danish record hunter here, and in this video I will talk about the Danish rock group called Daisy, and they released two 45s in the 70s and one full-length album, so let's get into that! They were formed around, I think, 1968 in Aarhus, which is the second biggest city in Denmark, and it's placed in Jutland. And the bands that were not from Copenhagen, they were just kind of neglected at the time, so it was harder to have any success. But Daisy, they actually had some local success, they were really looked upon as the next big thing, and they actually got to open Steppenwolf when they visited Denmark. I think it must have been in the late 60s, and also they opened for Black Sabbath, and that must have been in around 1971. But now this was still like the late 60s. They were like formed from the ashes of some beat groups. One of them was called the Shaking Phantoms, and they actually released one 7-inch on the Echo label in 1967. I have not heard that one, but it looks very promising. It looks edgy. It looks like it's supposed to be some good beat. So later on, Daisy, they were formed, and I guess they played some kind of psychedelic rock in the beginning, but I'm not sure. Lars Muhl, who was the organist of Daisy in the early days, he is the most prominent member, and he went on to a solo career in the 80s, and also he was co-founding the group called Warm Guns in the late 70s. And he also wrote a book about the band Daisy, and there he mentioned some early influences. I can't remember all of them, but it seemed like they were a little all over the place in their influences at the time. But I guess they just followed whatever was going on at in the late 60s and also in the early 70s when they released their 7-inch. But we will get to that. The thing was that Daisy, as you can see here, they signed a contract to tour Israel for 2 months. So they traveled all the way to Israel, and there they were supposed to share a touring schedule with another Danish beat group called Teen Makers. And Teen Makers, they had been very productive with several 7-inches, and also they released one record, and that was around 1968. That must have been around the time that they actually went to Israel. But the thing was, young rock groups, what do they do? They are partying and doing drugs. There were groupies, and that's what happened in Israel. And unfortunately, they were caught with a couple grams of weed they were smoking, and they were sent to jail. Both Daisy, but also Teen Makers. I don't know if it was all the members of Teen Makers and Daisy. I think it was all of Daisy that went to jail. and maybe some teenagers members, maybe all of them. And also there are roadie, Daisy's roadie, who was called Robert. He was actually the first vocalist of Den Gamle Mand er Havet. Later on they changed their name to The Old Man and the Sea. But Robert was the first vocalist in the band, and he decided to quit Den Gamle Mand er Havet to be a roadie for Daisy on that tour. So he was also in jail. There was lots of musicians there that went to jail. But the thing was, imagine being a very young group and you get caught with drugs on you. You can always argue if weed is a drug, but it's looked upon that, you know. You go to jail and you don't know what's gonna happen. Now, those guys, they were only for jail in like 2-3 days or something. But that's a long time still when you don't know what's gonna happen to you, and you're in a jail where there's nothing to do than just sit there with your own thoughts, with your bandmates, and it must have been painful to listen to each other's thoughts of what's going to happen, because you never know. You're in a different country, probably also have a whole different view on human rights, and you're in a prison where all the other inmates are licking themselves around the mouth and saying fucky to them. So that must have been hard. But they were actually released, and with that excuse that some Danish people helped the Jewish folks during the 40s, I guess they thought about some Danish people that helped sail Jewish people from Denmark to Sweden. Sweden was neutral, so they could be there in some kind of safety. I guess that's what Israel, the government of Israel, they were referring to, but I'm not sure. It also seems like a weird excuse to release a few persons because of that. But yeah, they were allowed to tour. The rest of the time they were supposed to be in Israel, and then they had to go home. But of course, Daisy, they were too afraid to smoke weed again in that country. But instead, they developed another weird addiction, and they started taking speed instead. Like that was better, but I guess back then you didn't have the same knowledge about drugs. So yeah, they got to tour the rest of the time in Israel, but the problem was that in Denmark, Daisy and Teammakers, they were all over the news for being jailed in Israel because of possession of drugs. Nowadays, I guess, you would expect a young rock group to smoke weed, but still back then in the 60s, this was 1969, it was frowned upon. There were many stories of Danish groups. Just think about the Danish beat vocalist called Peter Belly, when he also mentioned, that he's been smoking weed, it was frowned upon. That's how it was back then. So when Daisy, they returned to Denmark, all their Planet shows, they were cancelled. So that was like early cancel culture that Daisy got to experience back then in 1969. And imagine that was such a big problem that they've been smoking weed, because also in 1969 in Denmark, porn was legalized. So what's the problem here with Daisy having a little bit of fun? But the thing was, the momentum that they had was just kind of lost, and yeah, no shows. And imagine being a band from Jutland and you're kind of neglected by the big scene in Copenhagen, and also you're cancelled. But anyway, 1970 I think, it must have been in November 1970, because lots of places it says that this 7-inch was released in 1969, and that's wrong. Was actually, I think in November 1970 was the first review of this 7-inch, and it also says on the Wikipedia page that was released around that time. There are several facts about that, but they got to record this 7-inch, and I think it was at the Metronome Studios in Copenhagen, and was produced by Jack Fritjof, who also had his own private label called Jack Speed Records, and also issued on the Circle label. Only a few releases was actually put out on the Circle record label, owned by Jack Fritjof. But yeah, here you can really hear the heavy influence that Daisy had gotten, you know? They were looked upon as the bad boys of Danish rock music, and then they put out a 7-inch with an A-side called Lucifer. And Lucifer sounds like if Deep Purple, they were from Detroit. It's really has this raw power energy to it, and also it's kind of Deep Purple-esque with lots of organ and some in-your-face guitar work. It's super cool. Such an awesome track. Probably the heavy rock song from Denmark in the early 70s. I really think this one, man, can it be any heavier for Danish standards? The B-side track, Zimmerman, it's more a sort of a symphonic instrumental, kind of, you wouldn't have expected that, I think, but it's also kind of cool, but nothing compares to Lucifer. That track, man, that's just awesome. But somehow they had plans of releasing a full-length record around this time, and that never happened. And if they just had done that, you know, I think if it was in the same style as this 45, man, that would have been brilliant. But that didn't happen. There was lots of problems in the group, and suddenly they all split up. So that's just sad. But anyway, Daisy, they were kind of reformed again in around 73, 74, I guess, by a bit of a different band. Some new members here, but Lars Muhl was still the one, you know, driven the band, like the primus motor, I guess, at the time. So they put out this 45 single, and I guess it was not as it is definitely a big disappointment compared to Daisy with Lucifer and Zimmerman. This is just like basic pop music, and so sad because look at the sleeve. It looks like it should, you know. It looks like another heavy banger, but it's not. So yeah, I guess that they were playing live with this lineup, as far as I know, and I guess they were just trying to earn for a living, you know. So they put out this, and yeah, big disappointment. But let's have a listen to a sample.
I dance in the morning when the world was begun. I dance in the moon and the stars and the sun. And I came down from heaven and I danced all night. In Bethlehem I had my birth.
After this abomination, I'm sorry to say, Daisy, they actually got to release a full-length record in 1975. And I must say my expectations, they were at a low when I first got this. But then I heard it, and it is definitely not what I had expected after listening to this 45 single. Of course, if you heard the Lucifer single and you thought that, wow, they also released an album, it's gonna sound like that. No, it's not. This is some commercial classic rock, and yeah, it was actually produced by Peter Thorup, the great blues singer that we had in Denmark. He produced it, and I guess he also contributed it with the backing vocals. It sounds like that on the opening track, The Adventures of the Virgins and the Wolf in Wonderland. Look at those, song titles. Also, there's The Bottle Romance of Mexico and Loyana and the Lonesome Brigade, Glorious Trip. And it's some really, reminds me a little bit of Bocce, their song titles, but where Bocce delivered with something extraordinary with their tracks. Daisy, it was more like, a bit straightforward in a way. It's nothing gets too heavy. It's I guess it sounds kind of international in a way, and the production I'm not really fond of, but I think actually the best tracks on here, it must be the ballads. Especially Loyana and the Lonesome Brigade. Now that track, it actually has something to it. It has a guitar solo that is actually, it's pretty awesome, that guitar solo. So some of the other tracks here, they are more like, very straightforward rock. But definitely you should check this album out because it's really not talked about a lot. And it's interesting to hear what happened to Daisy later on after their first single, and this was what came out of it. It actually sounds like a record that Daisy would have done as their fourth record maybe, when they had softened up a bit. If they had released the first record in 1971 or 72 as they had planned, that one would have been a heavy banger, but that never happened, so we had to wait a couple years and then this. But yeah, anyway, let's listen to some samples from it.
So don't you forget my name. Don't wanna say the same. And you're gonna love my kind. It's a message from my mind. From my mind. From my mind. From my mind. To be free is always a change. But we could not change the past.
hope that you liked what you heard, and please take a look at my channel in the next coming days, because I'm gonna be putting out those 45s, an album for you to listen to. So please take care and peace out.